Some voices carry a weight that goes far beyond the notes they hit. Robin Gibb had that kind of voice. Not the smoothest in any room, not the loudest, but unmistakable in the way certain things in nature are unmistakable. The specific quality of a storm about to break. The feeling of recognition in a place you've never actually visited before. Millions of people heard it on the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, on radio broadcasts in 1968, on late-night records that seems to understand something about loneliness that most pop music never tried to address. And yet the man behind that sound remained under-examined for most of his life. His brothers became the story. The era became the story. The Bee Gees, to most of the world, meant the falsetto on the dance floor, meant a cultural moment so specific it became both iconic and dismissible in the same breath. Robin Gibb remained the invisible architecture within all of it, the voice that grounded the harmony, the songwriter who shaped the catalog's deeper emotional register, the twin whose presence made everything feel like it came from somewhere below rehearsal and below strategy. This is the story of that man, from a home on the Isle of Man where music was the air the family breathed, through the dizzying heights of global pop music, through the collapse of one era and the slow construction of another, to a final decade spent creating in a home studio in Oxfordshire, not because the commercial world was calling, but because the work itself had always been the whole point. Robin Hugh Gibb entered the world on December the 22nd, 1949, on the Isle of Man, arriving just 35 minutes before his twin brother Maurice. That gap came to define almost nothing about the relationship that followed. Throughout their lives, Robin and Maurice moved in a way that suggested less two separate people than one continuous thought operating across two bodies, finishing sentences mid-word, harmonizing without prior arrangement, reading what the other needed before it surfaced in speech. Their parents, Hugh and Barbara, raised the twins alongside older brother Barry in a household where music wasn't a lesson or a performance. It was the condition of the space itself. The Gibb children taught themselves harmonies, worked out chord structures, and practiced three-part arrangements with a seriousness that came not from external pressure, but from genuine fascination with what their voices could accomplish together. Robin's voice, even in those early years, carried something apart from the others, a tremulous, searching vibrato that felt emotionally weighted far beyond his age, as though something in it had already been through experiences it hadn't yet had time to live through. The family relocated to Manchester in 1958, and then to Australia shortly after, settling in the suburban sprawl of Brisbane, where the teenage Gibbs began performing anywhere a stage existed. Talent contests, local television appearances, small clubs where the audience carried no particular expectations. None of it was beneath them, because all of it was experience. Their name came either from the initials of brothers Gibb or from Australian disc jockey Bill Gates, who called them the Bill Gates Boys and shortened it through regular use to the Bee Gees. Their first steady gig came at the Redcliffe Speedway, performing between races for pocket money, while radio DJ Bill Good and race announcer Bill Gates paid close attention to what these three brothers were building between songs. Robin was just 12 years old during those early Speedway performances, already developing the vibrato that would later define his entire identity as a singer, a sound that carried something unresolved in every held note, something perpetually reaching toward something just outside the frame of the melody. The Battle of the Blue and the Grey arrived in 1963 as their debut single, followed 2 years later by Wine and Women, which delivered their first Australian chart success. By 1966, frustrated with the ceiling the Australian music industry placed on their ambitions and drawn toward the larger British market, the brothers boarded a ship back to England with their parents' encouragement, and no certainty about what waited on the other side. Landing in Southampton in early 1967, they walked into a pop music scene still processing everything the Beatles had changed, and found a way through it almost immediately. Robert Stigwood, one of the most connected young music entrepreneurs working in England at the time, heard their demo tape and signed them within the year. and that single decision opened every door that followed. New York mining disaster 1941 became their first international hit, Robin's haunting delivery on the track so particular that listeners regularly mistook the Bee Gees for the Beatles themselves. Massachusetts followed, and tops charts across the United Kingdom and throughout Europe, and the momentum was immediate. I've Got to Get a Message to You came next, and then I Started a Joke, a song so completely shaped by Robin's voice that its emotional weight seems genuinely inseparable from the specific quality of his singing. His vibrato gave those early records a character no other pop group of the era could replicate. An unsteadiness that wasn't weakness, but transparency. A quality that revealed something genuine in the act of singing, rather than concealing it behind technique. Barry's voice was powerful and forward-moving. Robin's was always tilted toward some unnamed need. Together they covered emotional territory that neither could chart alone, and audiences who couldn't have explained the difference could feel it immediately. By 1969, internal tensions had built to a point requiring distance. Robin launched a solo career, releasing Saved by the Bell, which climbed to number 2 on the UK charts and demonstrated clearly that his individual talent could carry a record without his brothers surrounding it. Robin's Reign, the full album that followed, showed both his confidence and his genuine range as a songwriter and performer, with material that pushed further into emotional complexity than the group's commercial work had allowed. The separation proved brief. Whatever the three brothers produced together created something that none of them could fully replicate apart. And by the early 1970s, they had reunited, beginning the deliberate and sometimes uncertain process of finding a new sound that would eventually carry them somewhere none of them had mapped in advance. Jive Talkin' arrived in 1975 and announced that shift in unmistakable terms, a decisive move toward dance music that signaled the Bee Gees had located their next direction. What came 2 years later with the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack in 1977 confirmed it at a scale nobody had prepared for. The album sold over 40 million copies worldwide, earned multiple Grammy Awards, and placed the Bee Gees at the center of the disco era's single most defining cultural event. Robin's contributions ran throughout the record as the emotional substrate beneath Barry's extraordinary falsetto, present on More Than a Woman and How Deep Is Your Love, in a way that kept the music from being purely physical, that gave it a weight you felt somewhere in the chest before it reached your feet. Beyond their own recordings, the brothers were simultaneously writing and producing material for other artists throughout this period, with Barbra Streisand, Dionne Warwick, and Kenny Rogers all recording songs the Gibbs had crafted, and the harmonic sophistication they brought to those collaborations as record producers set their work apart from everything else running through the charts. 6 consecutive #1 singles, and a position as the only group in pop music history to write, produce, and record 6 straight chart toppers, describe the achievement in numbers. The cost sat on a different ledger entirely. Relentless recording schedules, sustained touring, and the sustained pressure of maintaining a position at the absolute peak of global popular music ground on all 3 brothers across those years. Robin, always the most emotionally exposed of the 3, absorbed that pressure in ways that only became visible slowly. His personal life throughout these years carried its own turbulences, running parallel to the professional ones. His first marriage, to Molly Hullis in 1968, produced 2 children, Spencer and Melissa. But the sustained demands of fame created a distance the relationship couldn't bridge, and they divorced in 1980. His battle with amphetamine addiction in the late 1960s had leaned heavily on Maurice's support and care. And years later, Robin returned that care when Maurice struggled with alcohol dependency. The bond between the twins, that near telepathic connection moving through both their personal relationship and their musical harmonies simultaneously, proved more durable than every commercial cycle and professional upheaval the years delivered. The disco backlash of the early 1980s hit hard and quickly. Radio stations banned Bee Gees music outright. Album sales dropped sharply. The cultural tide that had elevated them receded with a completeness that surprised nearly everyone. Robin responded by returning to solo work, releasing How Old Are You in 1983, which produced the hit Boys Do Fall in Love. His second marriage to Dwina Murphy in 1985 brought a steadiness to his days grounded in shared interests in history and the arts that his earlier years had rarely permitted. His perfectionism, the quality that had always made him exceptional in the recording studio, showed harder edges during this period, with weight fluctuating over the years and insomnia, a companion since early adulthood, worsening. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction in 1997 represented a reassessment that had been long overdue. The Bee Gees were recognized not as nostalgic curiosities, but as master songwriters whose contributions to popular music reached well beyond any single decade or stylistic movement. The harmonic and emotional sophistication of their catalog was finally being heard again with the attention it had always warranted, but hadn't always received. In 2002, Robin and his brothers were awarded the CBE, acknowledging both their musical record and their humanitarian work, particularly Robin's sustained personal engagement with environmental causes and wildlife conservation over many years. Maurice's death in January 2003 reordered everything. Robin's public statement that the Bee Gees' name should be retired, that to the brothers the name had always meant the three of them, and only the three of them, said plainly what the loss contained. He kept creating regardless, releasing My Favorite Christmas Carols in 2006 and working closely with his son Robin John on the Titanic Requiem, a classical work merging orchestral composition with contemporary sensibility in a way that showed his appetite for new musical territory had survived everything the industry and personal history had taken from him. The home studio in Oxfordshire became the space where music and grief processed each other on what felt like neutral ground, and the work that came out of those sessions carried the weight of both simultaneously. Emergency surgery for a blocked intestine in 2010, the same condition that had taken Maurice, brought the question of his own mortality into focus with an immediacy he could no longer defer. Liver and colon cancer followed in 2011. He continued making public appearances when his strength allowed, and recording when it didn't, maintaining through the very end the creative discipline that had defined him since those early performances at the Redcliffe Speedway. Robin Gibb died on May the 20th, 2012, at his home in Oxfordshire, surrounded by family and the music that had been the organizing principle of his entire existence from the age of 12 onward. More than 2,000 artists have covered Bee Gees songs, 200 million records sold across the catalog, 8 Grammy Awards. These figures appear in every retrospective and tribute, and they deserve to be there, but they capture almost nothing about what Robin Gibb genuinely contributed to pop music and to the singers who came after him. His vibrato shaped generations of vocalists across soul, rock, and pop in ways that are rarely traced back to their actual origin. The emotional honesty he brought to songwriting, the willingness to let a melody feel unresolved, to let a voice carry real uncertainty rather than manufactured assurance, raised a standard that outlasted disco, outlasted backlash, and outlasted every attempt to contain him within a single era or image. From a childhood on the Isle of Man, where the Gibb household ran on harmony, to a catalog still moving through the world long after his death, the story of Robin Gibb belongs to anyone who has ever heard something in a voice they couldn't fully explain, but found themselves unable to stop listening to.